Pendulum decks are widely known for their build-a-board style of gameplay, but without good tuners, they would be locked out of summoning some of the strongest monsters in the game. In this list, we're going to be covering the best Pendulum Tuners in Yu-Gi-Oh! And what makes them so good. And speeding into number 10, we have Speedroid Dominobutterfly, a level 2 wind tuner with a pendulum scale of 8. Its pendulum effect cannot be negated and prevents you from pendulum summoning non-wind monsters. It also allows you to, as a hard once per turn, discard a wind monster to target and add one of your banished wind monsters back to your hand. On the other half of the card, its monster effect isn't really an effect, but 2 restrictions. Dominobutterfly can only be used to synchro summon wind dragons and machines, and if it's used as a synchro material after being special summoned from the extra deck, it banishes itself afterwards. Speedroids is an explosive wind synchro combo deck with a strong turn 1 open and an even stronger OTK machine, and is absolutely the place to be for a wannabe wind machine combo piece. The deck has multiple searchers, an in-archetype emergency teleport, and an incredible extra deck consistency tool that both searches and dumps Speedroids from the deck while also giving you a second normal summon. That being said, Speedroids don't play Dominobutterfly, and for good reason. Despite the fact that Dominobutterfly's restrictions don't bother Speedroids at all, as they're typically only summoning wind dragons machines anyway, it's actually a Speedroid lock that prevents Dominobutterfly from seeing play. While they do so in a variety of ways, most Speedroids only lock you into wind monsters. However, a high Speedroid Rubber Band Shooter, arguably the most important card in the deck, has a restriction on its second normal summon effect, where you cannot special summon from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except for synchro monsters. Despite having incredible arrows for pendulum summoning, Rubber Band Shooter locks you out of doing so immediately after allowing you to use your searchers that would get you to your would-be pendulum scales. Even its recovery effect in the pendulum scale doesn't help Speedroid, as the ideal game state after a Speedroid combo is that either you've turned your entire hand into 3 or more negates on the field, or your opponent's life points total hit 0. Well, since it's not good in Speedroid, what about in generic Pendulum? Well, this is where those restrictions we mentioned earlier become extremely relevant. Wind is the least supported attribute in the game, and so locking into only pendulum summoning wind monsters really limits Dominobutterfly's utility in the pendulum scale, despite its premium scale of 8. However, considering its status as a tuner, you'd probably rather have it on the field anyways. Unfortunately, things aren't looking much better there either. While the monsters it can be used to summon are powerful, the levels and effects simply don't line up well with the rest of the Pendulum and Synchro toolboxes. So if Dominobutterfly has so many problems, why doesn't it make it onto this list? The main reason is that there simply aren't many Pendulum tuners in the game. Konami seems weary about printing good cards that allow the most efficient advantage generating card type easy access to the incredibly powerful Synchro toolbox. And as we'll see later in this list, that may be a very healthy fear for them to have.
We're going to freeze to death unless we call for help. How does your phone look?
My phone has just enough power to sign up for Factor. And with how cold it is out here, nothing would be nicer than a warm cooked meal that you can get ready in just 2 minutes.
Thank goodness you have internet. Quick call for help.
Oh, no can do. I'm too busy thinking about the premium ingredients they have on offer. Stuff like filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini, and even asparagus.
We are going to freeze to death. We don't have time to look at subscription food services.
When things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week. Or pause or reschedule your delivery times. Factor meals eliminate the hassle of prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Simply heat and savor the good stuff.
Wait, really? How exactly does this whole thing work?
Just sign up with me and we'll find out together. We're ghosts, we can't die anyway. Thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring today's video. Use my link to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. And roaring into number 9 is Gigathunder Giclops, a level 4 tuner with a pendulum scale of 5. Its pendulum effect is quite simple, allowing you to target a pendulum monster you control and monsters your opponent controls and change their battle positions. On normal summon, you can change a Giclops battle position, and if Giclops changes battle position, you can target a face-up spell trap card in the field and destroy it. Similarly to Dominobutterfly, Giclops banishes itself if it's used as synchro material after being special summoned from the extra deck. And if it's destroyed in the pendulum zone, you can return your other pendulum scale to your hand. Now, by simple virtue of being a level 4 pendulum tuner without any nasty restrictions, Giclops is already leagues ahead of Dominobutterfly in terms of playability. Level 4 is typically considered the optimal level for Synchro and Xyz plays, which allows Giclops to be used flexibly throughout the course of a game. Its scale of 5 also allows it to be used when pendulum summoning other level 4s, further reinforcing the theme of a level 4 pendulum toolbox monster. While its monster effects are a bit convoluted, they're also not half bad. Its effect to change its battle position on normal summon allows Giclops to trigger its own second effect to pop a face-up spell or trap. While ideally it would allow you to pop any spell or trap, including face downs, any effect that prompts early interaction from an opponent is an invaluable boon to any pendulum strategy. However, Giclops suffers from the fact that it simply doesn't do enough to advance your own board state. Modern pendulum decks typically only play cards that get them more cards out of their main deck, and prefer to rely on extra utility cards for effects such as back row removal. But in lower powered and sealed formats, Giclops is a card you should definitely look out for when building pendulums. And maintaining the balance of the universe at number 8 is Magicalibra, a level 4 tuner with a pendulum scale of 5. Unlike the other monsters on this list, Magicalibra is actually a normal monster who makes the cut on the merits of its pendulum effect. You can target 2 monsters you control and declare a level from 1 to 6, to reduce the level of one of those monsters and increase the level of the other by that number. Unlike most of the tuners on this list, you're more likely to play Magicalibra into your scale instead of summoning it to your field, despite its valuable status as a tuner. Level modulation effects are powerful, and often enable decks to utilize tools they were never meant to have access to. Being able to modulate the level of 2 monsters is twice as good, especially since it effectively trades levels from one of your monsters to another. Perfectly balanced as all things should. This double modulation effect, combined with its workable scale of 5, allows Magicalibra to easily adjust the levels of your monsters after pendulum summoning to set up various synchros and XC's plays. But not everything about Magicalibra is perfect. After all, it wouldn't be a scale if it wasn't balanced. The main downside of Magicalibra are its status as a normal monster, preventing it from being used as a required pendulum material for Beyond the Pendulum, and its somewhat low scale of 5, which typically prevents it from being used to easily access higher level XC's monsters. And riding into number 7 is Lightwurm Magician, a level 4 wind spellcaster tuner monster with a pendulum scale of 1. It is always treated as a Synchro Dragon card, and like most of the tuners we discussed up to this point, Lightwurm Magician banished itself if it's used for a synchro summon after being pendulum summoned. In the pendulum scale, Lightwurm allows you to negate an activated card or effect that targets a dark spellcast you control at the resolution of the effect, which notably means that Lightwurm doesn't activate in response like most negates. While the negate on its pendulum effect is indisputably powerful, it's also extremely telegraphed as Lightwurm has to already be face up on the field in order to resolve this effect. Nevertheless, Lightwurm Magician makes it this far up the list for the same reason as Giclops. It's a mostly unrestricted level 4 pendulum tuner. However, what sets Lightwurm apart from the previous cards is its name and effect, which is associated with Pendulum Magician and the Supreme King archetypes. Pendulum Magicians are one of the most well-supported pendulum decks in the game, possessing not an excess of cards, but a mostly focused pool of high-quality cards. They sometimes work together with the Odd Eyes and Performapals, but primarily prefer to lurk alongside other Pendulum Magician cards. In contrast to Pendulum Magicians, which is in Lightwurm's name, their connection to the Supreme King archetype may not be as obvious. However, its effect that treats it as a Synchro Dragon gives it a second purpose, allowing cards like Astrograph Sorcerer and Soul the Supreme Celestial King to use Lightwurm Magician as a functional fusion substitute for one of the much harder to access Clearwing Synchro monsters when fusion summoning Supreme King Zark. Overall, Lightwurm's archetype inclusion makes it a viable option in Pendulum Magician, Supreme King Zark, and a deck that looks for a generic, unrestricted level 4 pendulum tuner. And gearing up for number 6 is Performapal Odd Eye Synchron, a level 2 tuner with a pendulum scale of 6. On normal summon, Performapal Odd Eye Synchron can target a level 3 or lower Performapal or Odd Eyes monster in the graveyard and special summon it, but with its effects negated. They can also target any card in your pendulum zone, special summon it but with negated effects, and immediately synchro summon using itself and that card. Like many other pendulum tuners, Performapal Odd Eyes Synchron banishes itself if it's used as a synchro material after being special summoned from the extra deck. And in the pendulum scale, it can target a Performapal or Odd Eyes monster and turn it into a level 1 tuner. While Odd Eyes Synchro's scale effect can enable some silly plays, its name and monster effects are the real stars of the show. Its effect to special summon a low-level Performapal or Odd Eyes from the graveyard is technically good and a reference to Junk Synchron, but it doesn't come up often since pendulum monsters typically end in the face-up extra deck instead of the graveyard. However, its effect to generically synchro summon using a monster in your pendulum zone is quite powerful, and absolutely warrants the restriction of banishing itself after being used as a material from the extra deck. When used alongside strong, high-level pendulum monsters such as Performapal Monkey Board and Superheavy Samurai Monk Big Benkei, Odd-Eye Synchron used to be able to make some of the strongest boss monsters in the game with incredible ease while utilizing resources that would otherwise be considered leftover after a pendulum summon. This efficiency combined with its ludicrous searchability between the three archetypes of Performapals, Odd-Eyes, and Synchrons, and then the pendulum synchro climbing tool to delete entertainment to boot makes Performapal Odd-Eye Synchron a force to be reckoned with in Master Duel pendulum piles that still have access to Borreload Savage Dragon and Baron de Fleur. And flying into number 5 is Supreme King Dragon to Lightwurm, a level 4 light dragon with the pendulum scale of 8. On summon, Lightwurm adds a face-up Supreme King Dragon or Supreme King Gate pendulum monster from your face-up extra deck to your hand. It allows you to immediately summon a Supreme King Dragon Xyz or Synchro monster. It also returns itself to your hand from your face-up extra deck if a face-up pendulum monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect. As a pendulum scale, if a monster is special summoned and you control both Supreme King Zark and another pendulum monster, you can special summon Lightwurm from your scale and make either a Lightwurm or another pendulum monster you control become the same level and attribute as each other. While quite convoluted on paper, in practice its scale and monster effect are designed to work together in Supreme King decks to synchro summon Supreme King Dragon Clearwing on your opponent's turn, which destroys all face-up monsters your opponent controls when synchro summoned. In addition to this, Lightwurm also functions as a recovery tool in grind games, returning to your hand from the face-up extra deck when your opponent inevitably attempts to break your board. This recursion, in tandem with its on-summon effect to add a scale from your face-up extra deck to your hand, allows Lightwurm to add scales from your face-up extra deck extremely often, and even works on your opponent's turn when summoned to make Clearwing. Even in the worst of games, Lightwurm ensures that you will always have the Supreme King pendulum scales of your choice in hand as follow-up. However, while Lightwurm is a great modern card in Supreme King Zark decks, it lacks the splashability that most decks looking for a Pendulum Tuner are looking for. Outside of exactly Zark, Lightwurm might as well be a normal monster since almost all of its effects interact exclusively with in-archetype cards. And blazing to number 4 is Nobledragon Magician, a level 3 fire spellcaster tuner with a pendulum scale of 5. It can only be used as a synchro material for dragon monsters and places itself on the bottom of your deck afterwards unless used alongside exclusively Odd-Eyes monsters. Speaking of which, if Nobledragon Magician is either in your hand or graveyard, you can target a level 7 or higher Odd-Eyes monster you control to special summon this card and reduce that target's level by 3. Similar to White Wing Magician, Nobledragon Magician belongs to the Pendulum Magician archetype, making it incredibly accessible within dedicated Pendulum Magician decks. But in contrast to White Wing Magician, which is effectively a vanilla, Nobledragon Magician is designed to enable the synchro summon of level 7 and 8 monsters alongside the many Odd-Eyes dragon monsters. However, it can also be used to easily make any generic Link 2, since it doesn't have any restrictions that prevent it from being used to make other types of extra deck monsters. But it gets even better, since Nobledragon has the ability to summon itself from the graveyard, it can also be used for fusion plays or as a discard fodder without actually paying much of a cost at all. This is an incredibly powerful recursion effect, and strikingly similar to some cards that have found themselves on the Forbidden and Limited list. That being said, you may have noticed that I skipped over Nobledragon Magician's scale effect. That's because its pendulum effect is simply to destroy itself unless you have another Pendulum Magician in your other pendulum zone. While this makes it less than ideal as a pendulum scale, it really doesn't matter in most cases since you primarily just want to use its monster effect anyway. And charging the battle for number 3 is Luster Pendulum the Dracoslayer, a level 4 tuner with the pendulum scale of 5. In the pendulum scale, it can destroy a monster in your other pendulum scale to add another copy of that monster from your deck to your hand. And as a monster, it cannot be used as material for a non-Dracoslayer fusion, synchro, or Xyz monster. While seemingly worse than many of the other previous tuners at a glance, what Luster Pendulum lacks in card text, it makes up for in sheer card advantage and accessibility. Back in Master Rule 3, before you had to pendulum summon to Link Earls or an extra monster zone, Luster Pendulum was known as a really good pendulum tech for filling the extra deck with a ton of bodies to pendulum summon out. Its effect to destroy your other scale and refill your hand may not be flashy, but it's also not a hard once per turn, allowing you to use multiple copies you're quite likely to have due to his extreme searchability by cards like Draco Face-Off and Duelist Alliance. But that's not all. Despite its archetypal lockdown when it comes to being used as material for extra deck monsters, pendulum decks, both back in the day and even today, don't mind summoning the synchro monster Luster Pendulum was intended to be used for, Ignister Prominence, the Blasting Dracoslayer. On top of shuffling cards in the field into the deck by destroying pendulum cards on the field, Ignister Prominence can also special summon any Dracoslayer from your deck, allowing you to shred your opponent's board while furthering your own plays. Oh, and did I mention that Ignister Prominence is also not a hard once per turn? This utility solidified Luster Pendulum not only as the premier pendulum tuner for a long time, but a premier pendulum monster in general. However, as time passed, a few things changed for Luster Pendulum. The specific wording on its restriction is as follows. You cannot special summon Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monsters using this card as material except Dracoslayer monsters. While this restriction was adequate for its time, it wasn't future-proof, and allows you to use excess copies of Luster Pendulum for Link plays, since it was released before Link monsters existed. However, as the inevitable crawl of time passed and power creep left Luster Pendulum in the dust, he fell completely off the map of playability. But in recent years, he's finally returned alongside his own fully fledged Dracoslayer archetype, where almost all of the things that made this dated staple good in Pendulum decks of old made him just as good again today. And tuning into number 2 is Harmonizing Magician, a level 4 spellcaster tuner with a pendulum scale of 8. When Harmonizing Magician is pendulum summoned, you can special summon any Magician pendulum monster from your deck, except itself. But its effects are negated and it's banished when it leaves the field. Harmonizing Magician cannot be special summoned from the extra deck and can only be used as material alongside other Pendulum Magicians when Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz summoned. For a long time, Harmonizing Magician's versatility and splashability made it the gold standard for Pendulum Tuners. Its generic pendulum scale of 8 gives it versatility in a wide variety of pendulum strategies, not just Pendulum Magicians. But its unrestricted effect to special summon any Magician Pendulum monster from your deck when Pendulum summoned is downright absurd. This free emergency teleport-like effect allows a myriad of Pendulum decks to easily access rank 4s and a wide pool of Synchro monsters between levels 5 and 11. The sheer power this level of versatility provides for such little effort cannot be understated. It allows any deck with access to Pendulum summons to make nearly anything it could want. Combo pieces, Omni Negates, removal, boss monsters. Then, as if Harmonizing Magician needed to be even better, it also has no restriction on being used for Link summoning despite all the other restrictions on Harmonizing's material usage, allowing it to flex its already incredible utility into even more plays. The only real drawback to Harmonizing Magician is that it often gets stuck in the extra deck after being pendulum summoned from the hand, and that it often requires you to run a dedicated brick to special summon from the deck. However, these aren't even really that much of a problem since you can simply pendulum summon the brick alongside Harmonizing Magician, and due to the existence of cards like Exceed the Pendulum and Heavy Metal Foes Electromite that can retrieve Harmonizing from the extra deck for reuse before a pendulum summoning, it's not that big a deal. Overall, this level of consistency is what makes a solid pendulum combo piece and extra deck enabler. Much to the chagrin of duelists worldwide, the final card on this list took this ethos of consistency and ran with it perhaps a little bit too far. And comboing its way to the very top is Superheavy Samurai Prodigy Wakaushi, a level 4 tuner and a pendulum scale of 8. Its pendulum effect allows you to, if you control no spells or traps in your graveyard, special summon itself and place a Superheavy Samurai Pendulum monster with a different name in your other pendulum zone. Then, as a monster, if you have no spells and traps in your grave, you can special summon any Superheavy Samurai from your hand or deck in defense position at the cost of discarding a monster and locking yourself into only special summoning Superheavy Samurai monsters for the rest of the turn. Lastly, if Superheavy Samurai Prodigy Wakaushi is used as a Synchro material, you can place it from the face-up extra deck into one of your pendulum zones. Despite the enormous trade-off of giving up 2/3 of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Superheavy Samurai Prodigy Wakaushi was the card that finally made the trade-off worth it. Superheavy Samurai facilitated one of the scariest one-card combo decks in the entire history of Yu-Gi-Oh!, albeit for a thankfully incredibly brief period of time. The deck hinged around looping the non-once-per-turn Superheavy Samurai Soul Piercer from the graveyard to repeatedly trigger its effect to search for extenders throughout the course of the turn, and ended on numerous Omni Negates with minimal investment. The card that enabled this was Wakaushi, which would special summon itself to place the Superheavy Samurai Monk Big Benkei from your deck in the Pendulum Zone, which would search Soul Piercer, and so on and so forth. During its brief stint of legality, Superheavy Samurai warped the meta format around itself. The result was one of Yu-Gi-Oh's more recent hand trap or die formats, where players genuinely considered a card like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit simply because it was explicitly an answer for Wakaushi. Konami answered the general outcry of players rather quickly, who overall agreed the deck resulted in an unfun status quo, by banning the Superheavy Samurai Link 1, Superheavy Samurai Scarecrow. As a deck, Superheavy Samurai remains at its strongest in the OCG and Master Duel, where Scarecrow remains unhit. Banning the Link 1 left Superheavy Samurai severely weakened in the TCG, forcing it to curb its end board expectations, bulk up its engine, and commit to a normal summon, while also leaving it much more vulnerable to hand traps. However, leaving Wakaushi legal has allowed it to find and fill a different role as an incredible combo enabler and supplementary engine piece in various hybrid decks. Sometimes it's Wakaushi's ability to be recursive high scale that's important, and other times it's the easy access to synchro plays that it provides. On its own, Wakaushi still represents a pendulum summon or a rank 4 without a normal summon, both of which are incredibly powerful generic tools in any deck. Realistically, discussion regarding the potential of Wakaushi could go on forever, truly living up to the name of a prodigy. With enough bricks, extenders, time, and imagination, Wakaushi can make its way to effectively anything into the game, cementing it not only as one of the best pendulum tuners of the game, but also one of the best monsters in the game, period. Alright, and that's the list. If you think you may have looked over a good card for this list, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.